Welcome back to Mayo Clinic Radio. I'm Dr. Tom Shives.
And I'm Tracy McCray.
Tracy, when it comes to healthcare costs, the increasing price of almost all prescription drugs in the U.S. is a part of the problem. In 2018, for example, Americans spent $360 billion, that's with a B, on prescription medications. Now, that's over $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the U.S.
And while we might expect to pay more for new, innovative therapies, the truth is it's not just prices for new drugs and rare conditions that are skyrocketing. Pharmaceutical companies have raised prices sharply for commonly used medications to treat diabetes, high cholesterol, and asthma, just to name a few. So what's causing this problem, and what can we do about it?
Well, we're about to find out, Tracy. Dr. Vincent Rajkumar is an internationally recognized researcher and has recently been diving into this important subject. He has published articles examining the origin of today's drug pricing challenges. And while these views represent his own perspective, Mayo Clinic is privileged to speak with him to discuss the complex considerations involved in this issue. Dr. Rajkumar, nice to have you on the program. Isn't it true, Dr. Rajkumar, that we pay more for prescription drugs in the United States than anywhere else in the world?
Yes. First of all, thanks so much for having me on the show. Prices we pay sometimes are 3-4 times higher than what other developed countries pay for most common drugs.
And why is that?
Well, there are multiple factors, and some of these are self-inflicted. We do have a vulnerable population, and patients are willing to pay anything to get better from serious illness, from cancer to diabetes.
But isn't that true in other countries too?
Yes, it is true in other countries. So is the fact that there is monopoly protection. That is also true in other countries. But what we have here are certain unique factors that are not there in other countries. The cost of development is there in other countries. The patent protection is there in other countries. But what we have that they don't is in all other countries, when a new drug is approved, that's just the first step. The second step in most developed countries, in fact, all other developed countries besides the US, is there is a negotiation on price. What is the launch price going to be? Mm-hmm. And that is based on value. So if the drug prolongs overall survival by 1 year, they may be willing to pay 3 times GDP. But if the drug prolongs life only by 1 week or 2 weeks, then you cannot ask for that kind of price. In the US, there is no second organization or body that plays the role of setting the price after a drug's approved, so that the prices are basically whatever the manufacturer chooses it to be.
What are Tom and I have both watched the speech that you gave. We'll have the video available for folks to go and download it. So tell us the 4 reasons that the pharmaceutical companies say drug prices are so high.
Pharma usually says that drug prices are very high because it costs a lot to develop a new drug. The drug price reflects the value that the new drug provides. That market forces will decide the cost of the drug, and the price is what the market will bear. And the cost, any attempts to lower the cost will stifle innovation. And
those are all false.
Those are all false.
Yep.
Those are all false because you cannot explain the rise of insulin prices as the cost of drug development. The most commonly used analog insulins were patented in the 2000s. And then 20 years later, the price has gone from $30 a vial to $300 a vial for the exact same insulin. There was no innovation. It is not an improved product. It's the same product. That's the price has gone up. And then other studies show that the cost of development is not exactly $1 billion or $2 billion as the pharmaceutical industry will want us to believe.
So how is it that they're able to keep raising the price every year on an old drug that's off patent?
Yeah, let's talk about that insulin example that you just referred to.
Well, there are some unique factors, like I said, that are at price. So the launch price of a product is, we don't have an agency to set that. So the price is very high to start with. But for old drugs, we also prevent Medicare from negotiating. So the largest purchaser of drug products is forced to buy and provide the citizens with this benefit, but at the same time is prevented by law from negotiating for the best deal. So what happens is the price will go up without anyone able to negotiate for a better deal or a lower price. The other reason why this goes up is we have a system of middlemen where everybody in the supply chain benefits from the higher price. The person who's supposed to get you the best deal, the pharmacy benefit managers,
The PBMs.
the
yep.
PBMs, they make a percent of the list price. So the higher the list price, the better off they are from a profit standpoint. And so those benefits or those profits that they make are not passed on to the customer. They are retained by the PBMs. And there are only 3 PBMs in the US that control close to 90% of the market. There are 3 wholesalers who control about 90% of the market. So the high list price helps the pharmaceutical company. A percent of that helps the wholesaler, the pharmacy benefit managers, the pharmacies, everyone except the patient. So if you lower the list price, you risk going off the formulary because you will provide a lesser profit for the PBM than a higher price drug. This causes what I I referred to in the talk as erectile pricing. When you have Viagra and Cialis and Levitra, the price didn't go down due to competition. It kept going up because the higher the price, the more for everybody in the supply chain.
I think you mentioned that Viagra, when it first came out, was about $7 a tablet, and now it's $60.
Yes.
Okay, how did it ever happen that Medicare, when Medicare came along, that they made it so that we could not negotiate drug prices? How did it ever happen?
Well, I don't know the political situation at the time, but obviously at a time when we were trying to cut down Medicare spending and costs, here was a proposal in 2003 through the Medicare Modernization Act to provide citizens with an additional benefit, which is prescription drug coverage. That was not available before, but the whole Part D program was a vast expansion of benefits to the citizens. In order to do that, what was extracted was that you can do that provided you don't negotiate with pharmaceutical companies on the price of the drugs that Medicare will pay to get.
It must have been the drug lobby.
It is the pharmaceutical lobby because the person who championed this effort and put it through Congress went on to become the president of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association within a few months.
What about generics, though? This is what it's always been. Oh, sure, there's the name brand, but you could get generics.
So,
and why aren't there more? And why aren't they at low cost?
Well, there are 2 things. Why aren't there enough generics? Well, because we do have regulatory burdens. Many generic manufacturers shy away from the U.S. because of the enormous amount of paperwork and data that they require to submit to the FDA to get on the market. Generics, when they enter the market, they also have to be careful about how high they price the drug because a very low price means less profit for the pharmacy benefit managers. So they do price them higher. A lot of generic companies are also owned by big pharma. So what we need really is a more easy path for generics to enter the market, and also some non-profit generic manufacturers who are in it not to make a profit, but these drugs actually cost very small amounts of money to develop. And if you're really looking for Tylenol prices on expensive drugs, you need nonprofits whose motive is simply, we're going to give the lowest cost drugs for our patients, and we don't want to profit from it. I'm very encouraged that Mayo Clinic and Intermountain Healthcare and the Arnold Foundation and others have joined together to form Civica RX, which in the long term wants to actually manufacture some of the most commonly used generic medications at very low cost.
It was interesting in the speech that you gave where you talked about people don't want to talk about it. And even if in that exam room, the patient will ask the physician about drug prices, that the physician even then doesn't want to talk about it because of the way the whole thing is set up.
Yes, we are under time constraints, so we are not able to address the cost concerns with the patient or talk about affordability. As a physician, many physicians are also not aware of the resources available on finding out how much a drug actually costs. So I've had to educate people on goodrx.com or Blink Health to get an idea at least of the drug prices. Physicians are also not familiar with how Part D operates, or just because a patient has Medicare or insurance, what is a deductible, what is a copay, what is a coinsurance. These are all different things that physicians are not fully aware of. To be able to discuss in an intelligent manner with the patient, how can they get the lowest priced drug, whether it's lowest copay or lowest out-of-pocket for that particular drug. So this is something that is important. When I spoke to the mother of the Minnesota young man who died rationing his insulin, Alex Smith, his mother, Nicole Smith, told me the two things you want to tell physicians is to talk to patients about affordability and advocate for low prices.
All right, give us those two websites once more, Dr. Rajkumar.
The two websites I mentioned are goodrx.com and blinkhealth.com.
And you can go on there and you can find out what the actual cost of the drug is and where you can get it the cheapest.
Yes, and in fact, Consumer Reports, Lisa Gill did a whole article on this where she found for the most common 5 drugs like Lipitor, Plavix, you can get those 5 drugs, a month supply, for $66 at Health Warehouse, $100 at Costco, or you could pay $928 at CVS Target. And it varies from drug to drug, week to week, month to month. So one day it might be cheaper at one place, but in another day it might be cheaper elsewhere. So this is something, again, physicians, unless they are in the habit of checking, particularly for the patients who are paying out-of-pocket or cash for the drugs, which tend to be underinsured, uninsured, immigrants, those kind of people, or patients with high copays or coinsurance, where it's a % of the cost of the drug that they're going to have to pay, then we need to be able to tell them where to go for the best deal.
Well, we've been talking about the reasons for the high cost of prescription drugs in the United States with Mayo Clinic hematologist, blood specialist, Dr. Vincent Rajkumar. Time for a short break.
When we come back, looking to the future, what can be done to rein in the cost of prescription drugs?
Welcome back to Mayo Clinic Radio. I'm Dr. Tom Shives.
And I'm Tracy McCray.
We're talking about prescription drugs and how much they cost in the United States with Dr. Vincent Rajkumar, a hematologist, blood specialist at the Mayo Clinic. So, Dr. Rajkumar, we've talked about the exorbitant cost of prescription drugs in the United States, why that is, and now we want to know from you what we can potentially do about it as a country, as an individual, and as physicians.
Well, at the federal and state policy levels, there are several things that we can do. A few years ago, I was not hopeful. Now I'm very hopeful because many of these solutions are being discussed bipartisan way in both the Senate and the Congress of the U.S. Government. Number one, value-based pricing. Value-based pricing is adopted by most countries. What pharma defines as value-based pricing is very different than what value-based pricing actually is. Value-based pricing simply means that at the time of the launch of a new drug, there is a negotiation or on the ceiling, the highest price that the drug can be sold at. That is proportional to how much extra benefit this new drug provides. So if the new drug provides 1 year of extra survival, there is a ceiling on how much it can cost. And so we need to set up an agency which looks at exactly what the magnitude of value it provides and set a ceiling on the price. There is an institute called the ICER, which is now doing this job, and those recommendations can be taken into effect. And there's some precedent that some companies are willing to back off on the price, like Amgen did, I think, on the price of one of the lipid-lowering drugs. Second thing we should do is Medicare should be able to directly negotiate for price.
For sure.
I feel like I should have a horn.
Yes. And it's important because Medicare, after the first $5,100 of prescription drug costs, for many drugs, this can be used up in the first 2 weeks of the year. By February, Medicare is actually paying 80% of the cost of all Part D drugs not the insurer. The insurer pays only 15%, the patient pays 5%. So the biggest purchaser should be able to directly negotiate with companies. The third thing that we can do is to facilitate easy entry of generics and biosimilars into the market. Some of it requires changes at the FDA regulatory level in terms of how much data they need for bringing a new generic or biosimilar in. Some of it we can be very creative. We can have reciprocal approval, just like you and I can go to different countries because they allow you to travel visa-free, so we allow them to travel visa-free. So if we have a reciprocal arrangement with, say, Germany or Switzerland, that drugs that are FDA approved, that is the generic available in Germany or Switzerland, we'll give reciprocal approval, and you do the same for drugs that go through our process. It'll speed up the arrival of generics because companies wouldn't have to do this 2 or 3 times every single country. Non-profit generic manufacturers should be encouraged. Civica RX is one example, but more of them, including proposals like maybe for insulin, which is so critical and used by 30 million people in the US, that the US government itself can manufacture it. And it will solve a lot of the problems with price, because when it was sold at $20, Novo Nordisk, Sanofi, and Eli Lilly were still making money. But why price it at $275 to $300 a vial? It's not that expensive to make. And then we need to eliminate this incentive that physicians have to prescribe the most expensive option. Right now, if there are 2 drugs, one priced at $60 and one priced at $2,000, the physicians can make 6% of the cost of that drug. Patient doesn't know that you could actually make a take-home more by giving the most expensive option. This has been seen with Zometa and denosumab, with with Avastin and Lucentis for the glaucoma treatments. A $2,000 drug gives 6% of $2,000 to take back. A $60 gives only 6% of $60.
So these are drugs that are given in the office.
They are given in the office, and we need to remove the incentive to prescribe the most expensive option, and rather we can give a high fixed amount. You could give every time you get a physician-administered drug, we give you a flat rate, whichever the drug is. So take away the incentive, but set the fixed level at a level reasonable enough so physicians don't run into a loss. And we need to have some transparency about the negotiations pharmaceutical companies have with PBMs, so that right now what happens and how the prices are set and how much rebate is going to the PBM and how much is retained, how much is passed on to the consumer, nothing is transparent. And absent that, we have no idea on whether they are acting in your best interest, how much are they keeping, what role they are playing in the rising costs. So PBM transparency, or ending rebates, or rebates passed on to customers, or rebates that serve the real purpose, which is to negotiate the best deal, something like that around, so that whole middleman reform needs to happen. And then finally, I think we as physicians should speak out more. Right now, there are no allies. Physicians, as I told you, have very little time, and they also have a financial incentive to give the most expensive drug. So they're not out there. Yeah. Professional and patient organizations get a large amount of their funding from pharmaceutical companies, so they are not there. PBMs, they get better profits with higher list prices. They are not there. Even patients can be silenced by copay assistance programs, which take away the out-of-pocket, so they don't know the cost to the system. So we need allies, and physicians can be at the front lines of this.
We've been discussing the high cost of prescription drugs and potential solutions with Mayo Clinic's hematologist, Dr. Vincent Rajkumar. Dr. Rajkumar, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.